before we get to your report from the Defence Select Committee, the summary of which is we're going to need a bigger navy, lots of issues coming up there. Let me ask you about this vote in the House of Commons tonight. You're among the 80 or so Tory MPs who are expected to rebel. You've said for yourself publicly that you do not believe that we should be bringing in vaccine passports and various other measures. Why are you going to vote against the government then?
Well, it's not various other measures. I very much support the Prime Minister. Pleased to see him deliver that national address, making it clear where we need to go, what we need to do. 1 million jabs a day is the target. It's a tall order, though, and it's going to place further strain on our amazing but exhausted NHS. And I think there's some wider questions about our longer-term strategy. This pandemic has lasted a couple of years. We've got a couple more years to go. We've got to advance our crisis management capability, the government machine to be able to do this. Brexit, your favorite subject, we created a Brexit department, a climate change department. We need a department that deals with this, a vaccination workforce, so we can get ready for the 4th, 5th, 6th jab if required. On the vote itself, there's a whole series of votes, which I'm sure you've been discussing in the last couple of days. I haven't got a problem with many of them. They all fit into this plan to tackle this latest mutation, this latest variant. The piece I'm concerned about is vaccine passports. We've got a vibrant tourism operation in Bournemouth. It doesn't seem logical that you could turn up with your recent negative lateral flow test, but I could pull out my dog-eared 2-jab certificate, which was completed 6 months ago, and I'd still be let in. So it's important Parliament does scrutinise legislation. I disagree with that. There's other libertarian issues as well. If you want the consent of the nation to follow you, then what you're doing must make sense. And this seems to be a little bit illogical.
Well, it must make sense to be evidence-based. I object really to being required to show any of it. I mean, given that a lateral flow test isn't foolproof, if you've got symptoms, it's very likely to show that you have got COVID. It is perfectly possible you have a negative COVID test from lateral flow and still have COVID. We know this is incredibly transmissible, this Omicron variant. There's one thing we do really know about it already, in which case, if it's going to be that transmissible, these sort of measures wouldn't make a damn bit of difference anyway.
No, and that's the choice the government needs to make. It needs to take the advice, follow the science. And there's certainly restrictions that can come into place that make sense. I believe, face masks, particularly on the tube and the trains, absolutely makes sense.
I'm sorry, I disagree with you on that. Again, the data on those is scant if best.
You and I will disagree on that, and that's the whole point. Many people will disagree, but
that's why you don't have mandatory rules that aren't based on solid data.
Well, as I say, I'm more comfortable myself wearing a mask in these confined conditions where the airflow isn't great. That's my personal view. You can then
even if a virus is 500 times smaller than the hole in your mask, and so it's utterly meaningless.
Well, we're now getting into the details here. I'm telling you.
When people are being required to cover their faces, I think we should get into the detail. Do you not think?
No, I don't disagree. That's exactly what Parliament is for. But if you are wearing a face mask, then your ability to spread germs is much reduced.
No, that's simply not true. That is not a true statement based by the fact. I'm sorry, it's not.
But why is it that doctors, your dentist, everybody wears face masks?
They don't wear them to stop spreading a virus, Tobias. They wear them so they don't get spatters of saliva or blood from their patients.
Exactly, which could pass on COVID.
No, they've worn them long before COVID, and it's nothing to do with the disease. It's not getting spat. It's got nothing to do with the virus spreading.
Okay.
I'm sorry to go to detail and facts. Right, we'll leave that side alone. I'm just amazed by how many people. I mean, I've got a huge respect for you. You have on the show regularly. I've got a huge respect for you and so many of your colleagues. But the number of people who say they support measures because of the science, when the scientific basis of them is simply not there, I find really disheartening, because it seems to me that I don't think a talk radio host should know more about the evidence than the people making the decisions that affect people's lives.
No, there's a confidence measure here. There is a sense of consent. There is a desire to get us through this. And the idea of wearing masks, I believe, from what I've seen, it does make sense. What I'm trying to say is that it's separate to the passport issues.
Yeah, I get that.
Because everybody can wear masks, but they can continue around their daily activities.
Yeah, but
It's
you're not
less
being,
of
by the way, you're not
restriction.
required to wear a mask all day like people who work in supermarkets or on tubes. So very easy for the white-collared middle classes to say, oh, I didn't see the big deal. I pop into the shop, I wear a mask. I pop onto the tube or whatever mask. We're talking about millions of people being required to wear them all day, every day. Our children were forced to wear them for 8 hours a day. It's not a little thing. It's a huge thing. But I'm going to let that go. Let's talk about the Defence Select Committee report, because that's your day job, not just as an MP, but also chairing that select committee. And you and I have spoken many times about the threats we face internationally, and while we're all focused on COVID, ignoring the threats of Russia and China and many other threats elsewhere. But your select committee report has looked into the Navy, and the summary is basically, we need a bigger Navy.
We do. I mean, for those very reasons that you've been saying, that we've been discussing, the world is getting more dangerous. We're entering a decade of huge uncertainty. And if we, Britain, wants to play its role on the international stage, we have to have hard power there to back what we want to do up. That's part of the Global Britain plan. But when you look at the detail, I'm afraid our defence budget, it's stuck at 2.2%, even though threats, in my view, are greater than during the Cold War when we spent 4%. Now, the consequence of us having to look into cyber and space is that peacetime budget is now having an impact on our Army, Air Force and Navy. All three services are being cut, particularly the Navy. We're an island nation. We require access and the freedom of the seas for trade and energy needs. And I'm afraid 18 frigates and destroyers is simply not enough to look after all our interests.
Well, we had, when we saw in the Libyan, in the Arab Spring, the Libyan situation, we didn't have the boats to send there, and France did. This is the thing. There's so much focus on the cyber aspect and the future of all, forgetting actually, we've never been, it seems in our history, we've never been able to predict the nature of the next war, and whether it's a terrorist threat from the Middle East or whether it's Russia, whether it's China. We often seem to be basically sorting out our defence basis and capability on the basis of the last war.
Yeah, that's right. And it isn't necessarily a war or a direct conflict that we now need to keep focused on. Firstly, your wider point. When cyber and space threats turn up, it doesn't mean that old threats disappear. You have to watch your backs. And what we're seeing in the South China Sea, where China is dominating that area, they're making a claim on what they call the 9 dotted line. It will have an impact on our ability to send ships through, for us to be able to trade with the Far East, where many of our goods, particularly the tech goods, come from. So that will affect our prosperity. If we don't participate with the rest of the international community on actually defending the international freedoms of the seas, that will affect our economy. And unfortunately, whilst threats are rising, as you and I have discussed, the West has become rather risk averse. So I really do believe we need to turn this around. We need to invest in our armed forces and have greater appetite to look at some of these threats, work with our allies, and provide the statecraft to provide some of the solutions that we need.
Yeah, indeed. And especially as we're given how many people are expecting there to be possibly a move on Ukraine by Vladimir Putin in the new year. How likely do you think that is? And what do you think the West would do if he did march on Ukraine?
I'm deeply disappointed that we are not standing up to Putin. He exploits weakness. He respects strength. And after Afghanistan, which was a humiliating defeat, showing we don't have the strategic patience, not just Russia, but China is taking advantage of that. We should be shoring up our support in Ukraine, because it isn't just what happens in Ukraine, it's what happens next. What does Russia do after that? I guess, there may be a recall of Parliament to actually discuss the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Why not preempt it? Why not support Ukraine now, with some hard power, and stand up to Putin rather than being pushed around as we are at the moment?
Hear to that. Look, we ended on a note of agreement at least, but look, good for you for voting against the vaccine passports. I'll try and persuade you on the other issues eventually.